Good afternoon, as well as good morning to some. Welcome to today's webcast, How to Jumpstart Business Banker Sales Performance, hosted by Business Efficacy. Business Efficacy is a 20-year national sales productivity improvement practice. We provide sales leaders at all levels with processes, tools, programs, and side-by-side assistance needed to help them lead their sales transformation efforts, ensuring they get the sales results they need and shortening the time frame to get them. My name is Kurt Terrio, one of the principals of Business Efficacy. I'll be moderating the discussion today. We'll go for roughly about 45 minutes, and we'll leave the last 15 minutes or so to respond to any questions you submit. To submit a question, just type in the questions box on the right-hand side of the webinar window or control panel. You should see it down there to your right. I'll keep an eye on any questions throughout and collect a few for Linda Maxwell, my partner, to address at the end. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to our presenter, one of my business partners, Linda Maxwell. Linda also serves as the principal of the firm and is an original co-founder as well. As Business Efficacy's banking practice leader, Linda spearheads the design and delivery of services to help banking sales leaders to productively tackle today's sales execution issues and opportunities. Whether it's getting a sales or service process designed and implemented, putting training into practice, or guaranteeing technology tools get used, Linda ensures Business Efficacy is prepared with the best pragmatic solution for each client's unique situation. Her vast experience partnering with banking sales leaders at every level and every business line enables her to lead the team in the pursuit to deliver better and faster ways to productively get banking sales strategies put into execution. What you see on the slide to the right is a sample of some of the past and current banking clients we've had the great pleasure working with. Linda, thanks for sharing your time and insights with us today. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Whether I've met you a couple of weeks ago at the CBA conference, or if you're an existing client, or quite frankly, somebody that was a past client of ours, we're very excited that you're going to spend the next hour with us and really look at the issue of how do you jumpstart business banker sales performance. The objectives we're going to work on in the next 45 minutes to 60 minutes are the ones that you see: motivating bankers, getting bankers to consistently execute, and getting bankers to get breakthrough past their previous performance. We'll be looking at some critical how-tos to make this happen. A point before we get started, you'll see the word banker on here, and what I'm referring to when we're talking about the word banker is I'm referring to anybody who has responsibility for business banking sales. So in some respects, that might be a branch manager who has to do outside of the branch business development, to a business banking specialist, to a business development officer, to a business banker. They might be calling on prospects or clients that have $500,000 in sales to, I've heard recently that business banking now is going up to $100 million. So when we talk about bankers, I'll be referring to anybody who would fit in that potential area. As we look at what we're going to be covering today, the news is I'm not going to be sharing any magical silver bullet. We're really going to be looking at what are some fundamental things that sales leaders can do that if they do, you can get the jump start and you can have the bankers motivated, consistently executing and getting breakthrough performance. Because it's really, from our perspective and our experience, all about sales leadership. The four things that we're going to be specifically deep diving on are, number one, how do you get a real clear execution expectation defined? Number two, how do you get people ready and willing to actually execute that execution expectation? Number three, how do you get them to do it consistently, week in and week out? And number four, if they're executing it, how do you get them to be effective in what they're doing so you actually get the breakthrough performance that you're looking for? As we go through the presentation today and I share some of these how-tos, what I've done is I've picked two common business banking goals that we're seeing a lot of our clients working on. One of them that a lot of our clients are working on is new-to-bank business banking clients. So we'll use that one throughout this presentation as a means to give you examples of the how-tos we're recommending. And number two, a lot of people are working on how do we get more solutions or products within existing customers. In other words, how do we deepen the relationships we have with our clients? So those are the two examples that we'll be referring to as we go through these how-tos. So let's begin. The first thing that we want to look at is the expectation. And it seems obvious that you'd have to know where you're going and how you're going to get there. If we're going on any destination, we always know we have to know where we're trying to head, and we have to know what's the route. In other words, what are the activities we have to do, and how are we going to measure our progress as we attempt to get to that outcome. In sales and in business banking, what I can guarantee you, everybody on this line knows the destination. You all know the results or the goals that you have to hit. So that's the easy part. The part we're going to look at around expectation is, are the behaviors that need to be done well, the most critical behaviors that need to be done well, are those defined? And do we know what the measures of progress are along the way, that if we hit those measures of progress, we'll get to the destination? So if we look at that relative to new-to-bank clients, we know you know probably the number of new-to-bank clients that you want your bankers to bring in, or you know the retention rate or how many solutions, products you want within each of your existing clients. So the question then becomes, how do we figure out what we want the behaviors to be, what we want executed well? Well, the way we're going to look at this is we're going to start with the sales fundamentals, and we're going to introduce or reinforce for some of you on the line what are the fundamentals that define execution, and how do we use that to define what behaviors we want. The good news about sales is there's always a common place to start, which is you have to start with results. What you see here is we've defined the difference between a lagging result, and we're going to talk about a leading result. A lagging result, obviously, is what's the final score, what's the final outcome. So in the examples that we're going to use here, we're looking at, for new-to-bank business banking customers, the lagging measure is probably how many new-to-bank clients did you get. With deepening existing client relationships, you might be looking at cross-sell, or you might be looking at retention rates. So the lagging piece is important because you first of all have to figure out what is the big thing that you want to be able to accomplish, what's the big outcome you want. That's always starting point one. But you have to add this other piece, which is those milestones, leading indicators. And a lot of you know the definition of a leading indicator. A leading indicator is what are the measurable, quantifiable metrics, measures we would see that would tell us the right behaviors are being executed frequently enough or well enough. What I gave you here is a couple examples, again, looking at new-to-bank customers. If your strategy was a strategy of kind of referrals, in other words, you're going to get new-to-bank clients by getting referrals, introductions, leads into prospects, you might have a measure, a leading measure of how many leads, introductions, and referrals are you getting on a weekly, monthly basis. You might also be measuring how many new-to-bank pipeline ads do you get on a weekly, monthly basis. So those would be examples of two leading metrics that help define the milestones on our journey. If you were looking at deepening relationships with existing customers, it might be something like number of product adds to the pipeline, or it might be number or percentage of opportunities that are in the pipeline that have a certain amount of products or solutions attached to them. Again, these are just examples of what a leading indicator would need to be identified. You always need to have a leading indicator because that's the one that you're going to be able to see more frequently, and that's the one that will be a better gauge of, are your people doing the right behaviors. So in some respects, this is the easy part of the how-to and defining an expectation because it's the quantifiable outcomes. Now comes the part about defining the behaviors that you really need to have done well. At Business Efficacy, we always try and simplify things. Sales is complicated enough, so we try and find what's the simplest way you can look at something that's complex. So we've found in our experience that if you want the results to go up, and we don't care if it's a leading or a lagging measure, that three things become the factors that would impact it going up. One is the number of calls. So in other words, you might be able to increase the performance of the leading or lagging metrics by increasing the number of calls. Or You might be able to increase the leading or lagging metrics by changing who you call on, or you might be able to change the leading or lagging metrics by the way in which you interact with the people you're calling on when you're doing those frequencies. So it becomes real important to figure out for every leading indicator, what's the answer to quantity, right customer, and quality interaction? Because that becomes a part of the expectation, what we want executed. So let's look at what this might look like if we were using an example of new to bank clients and you had chosen the leading indicator of number of leads, introductions, and referrals. You might, as a part of your execution expectation, give them number of appointments they have to make with external COIs if you're using a referral generation strategy. You might help them understand that who they're making those appointments with are actually COIs of your existing customers. You might also help them understand that as they make those appointments with external COIs, on call on the existing COIs of existing clients, what behaviors they have to do well. And you see 2 or 3 behaviors here that we commonly see have to be done well when you're working with external COIs in order to get them to generate the leads, introductions, and referrals that you want. So this would be an execution expectation. So one of the first things that you need to do before you can get people willing and ready to do something is you have to be really clear yourself as a leader on what is it execution looks like. And this would be one example. Let me give you another example. This next example would be to the existing clients. So with existing clients where you're trying to get more solutions or products sold with existing clients, it might be how many business review calls that you're doing on existing clients. You might help them understand if they have a significant portfolio, maybe it's on the top 100 clients. And you might have to define what are, again, 2 or 3 behaviors that have to be done really well in order to get either a certain number or a certain dollar amount of products into the pipeline as adds to existing clients. So both of these examples are trying to reinforce what an execution expectation looks like. So when we think about summarizing the key how-to around expectation, you need to always, if you want something to be executed well, before you can even get them motivated or consistently executing it or getting them breakthrough, you first have to start with, am I really clear? Do I know what I want to have happen? And we always recommend that you have to have a how-to around, so how many calls, on who, in other words, you might have to come up with some criteria, and what am I supposed to do well, which is 3 or 4 high-impact activities that need to be done all the time when they're doing this particular type of call. So the question might be, why is this so important, Linda? Why do I need to be this specific? Well, the simple answer is, going back to what I was saying a couple of minutes ago, you can't motivate people to do something if you're not really clear on what it is. You can't get consistent execution of something if you're not clear on what it is. And you can't get them to become effective at something that they're consistently executed if you don't know what it is. So we're having to start with it in some respects, which is a really clear execution expectation. Now, in some respects, what I just went through, a lot of you might be saying, wow, that really sounds simple, Linda, and that would be awesome if that's what you're saying to yourself. What's interesting is it's simple, but it's not easy. And let me give you a couple examples, because as we work with a lot of sales leaders out there, business banking sales leaders, we see people go, got it, but when we really get into the details of what they're doing, they don't got it. So let me give you some quick examples, and then we're going to have a polling question for all of you. Examples of not getting what we just talked about is a sales leader, a business banking sales leader who has many results or many leading indicators. Many is not a good way to get movement forward. So they have too many. They've picked results, and I don't care if it's a leading or a lagging result, that is very difficult for the banker to actually give themselves feedback. So an example would be profitability. A lot of banks right now are looking at product profitability or relationship profitability. That metrics, although a good one for the bank, is not a good one if you're really trying to get people focused on execution and knowing how to measure their own progress. So that would be a challenge. And what a lot of the banks are challenged with right now is they just have too many measures. And if a sales leader chooses to talk about many, many measures, I don't care if they're leading or lagging, it tends to minimize execution on anything that's really important because it dilutes. It dilutes what's important versus what's not important. The ones who really get it make a decision. They put a stake in the ground and they say, you know what, these are the one or two leading indicators that we really are going to concentrate on week in and week out that we know if we hit. Our lagging indicator, like number of new-to-bank clients, is going to be hit, or we're going to get the cross-sell that we want with existing relationships. So they make a decision and they stick with it. And they take the time to figure out quantity, right customer, quality interaction. And in particular, what are the high impact things that week in and week out really have to be executed? So that really becomes a big part of step one. So we're going to take a pause for a moment here, and we're actually going to ask you some questions relative to what I just covered on the first thing we need to do well if we want to jumpstart business banker performance.
Okay, let's see what it tells us.
Interesting diversity in what people had. If you are trying to figure out in this particular situation what is best, the final answer is best. The final answer, which right now it says answer C plus a description of 3 to 4 high impact sales activities, what it was saying is yes, I've got a leading indicator. Yes, I've defined quantity. Yes, I've defined right customer or prospect. And yes, I've defined the high impact activities. So what this would be saying is 36% of the people here responded, we're really doing the right first step to getting a jump start on business banker performance. So thank you. So let's move on to the second item that we need to do well. That particular item is a lot about, once you've got this great clarity around what you want people doing, in other words, what execution looks like, it's great that you've got it clear in your mind. Now you have to get people ready and willing to actually do it, motivated to do what you want them to do. And what's interesting is how many questions people have when they begin to get asked to do something. They're wondering, so what exactly is it you want me to do? And why, quite frankly, would I do that? And quite logically, you're not going very far very fast if you don't have them understanding what they're supposed to do and why they would want to do it. So let's look at this. Let's look at readiness first. What readiness is people being extremely clear on what it looks like that you want me to do and what it looks like in my daily, weekly, monthly routine. So you need to spend the time as a sales leader really having a dialogue around what is it you want people to do. So that's that execution expectation that we just talked about a minute ago. And a dialogue about how is that expectation similar or different from what they're currently doing. So you might be saying, why do I have to talk about what's similar or different, or why do we have to get into that detail? Well, if you just communicate the what, there might be many people who think, well, I'm already doing that, or I'm not sure that it applies to me. They might think doing it once a week, once a month is the consistency that you're looking for. So by going into the detail on how is it similar or different from what I'm currently doing day in, day out, week in and week out, you begin to provide the crystal clarity to them on what exactly you need them doing or what they need to do for themselves. It becomes very self-discovering and more clear in their minds. So that's kind of step one, how to readiness. Step two to the readiness piece is when you are having this dialogue about similar or different, yes, you need to start with kind of the description, the statement of here's the execution expectation. But then you need to take the time to really find out whether or not they understand it. So that's where you're asking them to do anything from feed it back to you, ask them to describe, so what would this look like tomorrow based on what we just described? How would you describe what is different given what we just got done talking about? So you have to have a dialogue to ensure that they really are clear on what it is the execution expectation looks like. And last but not least, gain commitment. You need to take the time to find out if they're really committed to doing it. So you have to get them to say, yes, I'm willing to do this, and yes, I'm willing to start on it literally if it has to be tomorrow. So taking the time to go through those details becomes very, very important. So you might have readiness. Going through all these things, you've got readiness, which is part one of motivation. The second piece is actually looking at creating some kind of willingness. This part of the conversation with them is a lot about explaining and looking at, so what's in it for them? The question of what's in it for them has to be tackled. If you don't talk about it, they're going to answer the question on their own. And usually, if it's a real change that you're asking them to do, the answer to the question is, I don't have to do this, or I don't have to do it to the level that my manager or leader really needs me to. So you have to have a dialogue about what's in it for them. It's real important to connect to what they care about. What's interesting is most business banking leaders still think most people are motivated by money. Research continues to show that a small percentage are, and money is important, don't get me wrong, but the primary motivator, the motivator that gets people to do things that they might not be comfortable with, which is typically what you're asking them to do when you are implementing a change, connects to personal motivators that might be something like recognition, respect, promotion, customer satisfaction. So you have to take the time to A, know what that is, and then B, show how what they care about, what their primary motivator is, how doing what you're asking them to do will really help them get to where they need to go. The visual that you see here is just a visual of the type of connectivity we're talking about here. So what it would say is that you would be looking at the activity of, let's just say, calling on external COIs, doing those 3 behaviors I talked about earlier. So you'd be describing that activity and saying, if you do this activity, this leading indicator of, and with the new client scenario, it was number of leads, introductions, referrals. You'll get this leading indicator. And if you get that leading indicator, you're going to, with more introductions, referrals to new-to-bank clients, you're going to get more new-to-bank clients. If you get more new-to-bank clients, here's what ultimately happens for you. You're going to be recognized in the organization, or you're going to make this money, or you're going to be respected by others within our organization. So you have to, in essence, connect all those dots. They will not take the time to connect all those dots. Many of us as business banking sales leaders think that our people can figure out what's in it for them. Reality is they don't take the time. Reality is if it's an uncomfortable change, they probably are coming up with an answer that's not in alignment with what you want the answer to be. So we have to make sure that we do that for them. So if we, again, look at what I just went over, hopefully all of you are saying, that sounds simple, Linda. Those how-tos, simple to do, but you're also potentially saying they might not be easy. And that is true. So let me give you some examples of people who think it's simple but don't quite have it understood as to what it looks like. So some people who don't quite get what this looks like, their definition of readiness might be that you would actually have this communication of what the execution expectation is in a group setting. And in reality, it needs to be done one-on-one, because only through one-on-ones will you really be able to talk about what's similar or different for that particular individual. They think that telling it once is enough, and it's not. Also, people who don't get it think that the willingness is about money, and so they'll talk about this is how you'll make more money, when, again, money is what motivates some people, but most all of us are motivated by things other than that. People who get it, who really do what I just talked about well, what would that look like? Would be an example of some of those things. The readiness piece, they'd be taking time to go individual by individual and have those dialogues on similar, different, making sure they understood, getting the commitment. They would discuss. So what does this tell us about what you need to start doing, stop doing, continue doing, change? So they'd make sure that the person is that clear and kind of has an understanding of how this gets integrated into their daily, weekly, monthly routine. And they, as they were doing this, would be talking about the banker's personal motivator. They'd be showing how the behaviors lead to the leading indicator, ultimately gets them to their personal motivator. And they make sure that they would be personalizing it for individual, and they'd be reinforcing it on a regular basis. Motivation, motivating people to do something, that is difficult is not something that you just do once and then you're done. You have to do it over and over and over again. And people who get it understand the frequency component. So again, we'd like to give you an opportunity to weigh in here and just do some reflection on either yourself or your sales leaders within your own organization and seeing where they are. Okay, this one's a little bit more diverse than the last one. Just as a summary, if you look at the top one, bankers know the behavioral expectation, that's kind of like phase one. The second answer, answer A plus, that would be kind of phase two. The next answer, the best answer is all the above, plus bankers have a commitment to the execution. So 45% of you have willingness and readiness to do what needs to be done at a pretty high level and have the leaders doing the right thing. So great job on that. So let's go to the third factor that impacts Jumpstart. So if we again go back to, so where are we? Where we're at right now is we're assuming you've got clear execution expectation. Now you've got people motivated, ready to do it. Still doesn't get you where you ultimately want to go, because now you have to get them consistently executing it versus executing it once in a while or some of the time when they want to do it. What we know is when you're asking people to do consistent execution, most of the time that's change. Change is hard, and what change sometimes feels like to the people, in this case business bankers who are being asked to do it, feels like you're trying to put a round peg in a square hole. It just doesn't feel comfortable. And what that means leaders really need to do well is leaders need to be giving feedback that's consistent, it's frequent, it's quality, it's personalized, because without that consistent quality feedback, the chances of consistent execution on behaviors that you need, big indicator to happen, are going to be significant. So this is where, if I was asked you, so what probably needs to be happening, this is where you say, well, this is where the sales leader actually needs coaching, managing, et cetera. Well, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about follow-up. Once you've got the execution expectation clearly out there so people are ready and they're motivated, now it's really important that the sales leader do follow up. And there's going to be two components to follow up that we're going to talk about that will drive consistent execution. One of them is measuring and monitoring, and the other one is feedback. Now, measuring and monitoring, that's an interesting one because everybody goes, well, of course, Linda, we need to do that. And you'll see in the upper left there, inspect what you expect. I bet most of the people on the line here, if we did a poll, would say yes, they've heard that. I actually was curious as to who started that quote, so I went to Google to find out. And there's so many people that are taking credit for it. I'm not even going to acknowledge we all know that you have to inspect what you expect. What's intriguing as it relates to an execution expectation is many times sales leaders have not identified the way in which they're going to measure and monitor all parts of their execution expectation. And that's why we have the sales formula to the right there, because you have to figure out how are you going to measure the quantity of calls that you're asking them to do, whether they're calling on the right customer prospect COIs, doing those high impact behaviors, and getting that leading indicator result. We need to figure out how we're going to get information on all of those things that relates to the expectation we sent. And we have to do it at a frequency that's appropriate for the expectation. So let me explain what I mean by frequency appropriate for the expectation. If you ask bankers, business bankers, every day for something, but you're not going to do something with it every day, you might get accused of micromanagement. So you want to ask for something at the frequency in which you're going to do something with it. Or another thing that you want to be careful of is asking for something at a frequency in which it typically doesn't get done. So in other words, if you want a certain kind of add to pipeline per week, but in reality is you're looking for one per month, don't ask about it on a weekly basis. So make sure that the frequency is in alignment with either the frequency in which you're going to give feedback and do something with it, or the frequency in which they should be hitting some kind of execution, either the behavior or the outcome. I want to look a little bit at the behaviors and results, because this is where we see a lot of sales leaders are challenged. So let's look at where would we possibly find the behaviors around some of these leading indicators. So let's start with the easy one, tracking the results. Most people have pretty good tracking on leading indicators unless it's around execution of something that you haven't been getting the business bankers to do really well. So again, let me give you an example. If we go back to that new to bank client expectation, remember the leading indicator on that one was number of leads, introductions, and referrals? Well, many of the business banking organizations that we work with don't have a means right now to easily track that, measure, and monitor it. So they need to find one. If it's existing client relationships where we're trying to add things to the pipeline that are about deepening the relationship, challenge a lot of our clients have is they're used to measuring credit adds to the pipeline, but not necessarily other products and services. So they need to figure out some way to measure that. So those would be two examples of you need to figure out how you're going to track the leading measure that you said you really needed accomplished on a weekly or monthly basis. So let's look at the next item, quantity of calls. This one is, again, one that a lot of people go, hey, we track calls. But yes, we need to, if you want consistent execution of an expectation, you need to measure that type of call. So again, let's go back to our example. The new to bank client scenario, we were putting out there that you had to call on X appointments with external COIs. That would say you need to find out, are we calling on the X number of external COIs? The other expectation that we had is doing business reviews in order to find more needs with existing clients. So you'd be needing to know, did we or did we not make the calls doing business reviews? A lot of our business banking clients right now are tracking number of prospect calls or client calls that wouldn't give you insight into whether or not people were doing the execution expectation I've been throwing out as an example. So you'd need to figure out, how would you get that? How would you know the quantity of calls that would relate to the execution expectation that we talked about? So now let's look at right customer, right client. This one, if you've got the quantity of calls, many times this one's already taken care of for you. What this says is you need to know, are they calling on the right people based on the execution expectation that you laid out? So again, let's go back to our example. With the new to bank clients, we were saying you have to call on COIs of existing clients. So you'd have to know if they are or they aren't. With the existing clients, the expectation was that you're calling on your top existing clients, top 100. So you'd have to know if they're calling on their top 100. So you'd have to find a way to know, are the calls that are being made on COIs, those types, are the business reviews that are being done on those top 100? You'd have to find a way to do that. Now we get to the most difficult one. This one speaks to, do we know what's really going on during the conversations with, in this, again, our scenario, with COIs or with existing customers? So there is no tracking report that'll give you the answer to that question. So this is where sales leaders really have to be involved and in the details, because the way you're going to find out what's really happening or not happening in the dialogues, in the interactions with clients, prospects, COIs, is to either have pre-call plan conversations, so know what's happening in the pre-call plan. What do they plan to do? That gives you some data. Or you go on the call and you actually see it in action. Or you debrief the call so you can actually talk about what did or didn't happen on a particular call. Or some of you have where they have to actually enter the data that they get from a business review, for example, into your technology system. Or some of you even have where they have to log the detail around a COI meeting. In other words, what was the agreement we had with the particular COI? So you do need the time to figure those particular things out, because if you don't have those things figured out, it becomes extremely difficult to give quality feedback. So step one in great follow-up around execution is you have to have made a decision ahead of time. How am I going to know? What's the most efficient way to get all of this information? So let's assume that you've got the data. You've got the information about what they're doing and not doing. Now you have to do the feedback component, which is most of us know you have to give people feedback, but I want to talk about if you want consistent execution week in and week out around an execution expectation, what do you got to do? So what you see here is some obvious things, but some not so obvious things. The diagnose, obviously what you need to do when you're giving feedback is you need to dialogue about progress on the behaviors and the outcomes. So the things that I just got done giving you detail on what you have to measure and monitor, that's what you have to dialogue about. And you have to dialogue about how are the quantity of calls that you made, like quantity of calls on external COIs, or quantity of business reviews in alignment or not in alignment with what we said needed to be done. How are who you called on, the COIs you chose, the clients you chose, how is that in alignment or not in alignment with what you had as an expectation? And then how are the behaviors, those 3 high impact behaviors we had when you're interacting with COIs? How'd you do? And the same thing with when you had to do those business reviews. How'd we do? So you have to dialogue about the behaviors. You have to always be linking, obviously, to that expectation. That's why we have expectation kind of running across the bottom. Interestingly enough, we always, as sales leaders, need to, as we dialogue about what's working and not working, make sure that we take the time to give people positive feedback. And sometimes early on in execution, it's for effort. Because as many of us know, when you're trying something new, you're not necessarily going to be successful. So you need positive feedback just for effort. So as sales leaders, we need to make sure as we're having this dialogue about what's working and not working, we're A, during that dialogue reinforcing the expectation, but B, we need to make sure that we sometimes are just even acknowledging and recognizing effort, but absolutely recognizing progress either in doing the behavior or reaching the leading indicator. Real important. And we need to, if they're not making progress or not trying, we need to have a dialogue about it. And we use the word challenge because challenge is simply putting it on the table and understanding why something isn't happening. We need to look at that and dialogue about that's challenging. Challenging is simply putting it on the table. And at the end of any feedback conversation is obviously reinforcing that we want to stay the course, so to speak. So if we were looking at this kind of things, we'd have to be making sure that that execution expectation is covered, all of those particular pieces. So again, hopefully what you're saying is, that sounds simple, Linda. Well, if you really want consistent execution, there's a couple of things that we put as, and here's how you get much more consistent execution. It's real important that you do it frequently, consistently, and you customize it for each individual. You don't do it in group settings. In other words, you focus on the high impact few, which is your execution expectation. You stay with it. You don't change the execution expectation frequently. You stay with it because that's the one that you've already determined is high impact, and it takes a while for habit to get created, as we all know. And if they're not doing it, you have the courage and you take the time to take it on, as we'd say, which is the challenge conversation. So again, there's people who go, I got it, but they don't got it. So let me give you a couple examples. So the sales leaders who are thinking they're doing it, but this is not what good looks like. What good doesn't look like is when you're simply measuring results or calls, feedback done on a quarterly basis, or it's done in a group setting, or when you're meeting with them, it's primarily deal talk. That's a term that a lot of people are using, where if the only thing that you're doing during your one-on-ones with a business banker is talking through the deals, that's not feedback on behavioral execution. That's strategizing on deals. What those who really do it well do is understand that change starts with them first, and so they get really conscious of how am I going to measure and monitor all the elements of my execution expectation? What does that look like? And that they are consistent in their feedback. They're not giving up. They're staying with it. They're staying consistent, and they're having those challenging conversations. So they're really staying focused and making sure that people are prepared on what's really important. So again, we'd like to offer up a polling question here just to kind of see where you might be on some of the things that I've covered. Wow, this is good. This is good. This question was obviously different because you got to pick all four if you wanted. What this is saying is we already do quite a good job on knowing how we're going to measure and monitor behaviors, and we're quite good on giving positive feedback when it's warranted. So it looks like our opportunity is to do it well, which is a very good consciousness on behalf of the people that are on this line, because sometimes the difference between getting execution and consistent execution is what we as leaders do differently. So the items that I had on the feedback done well really are some of the key things that leaders can do that are just, quite frankly, little tweaks that would really make a difference. So thanks for your thoughts here. Okay, let's go on to the last item. So first item was we got an execution expectation. Second item was we got people motivated. Third item was we got them consistently executed. That still doesn't give us breakthrough. So in the last 5 minutes before we open this up for questions, let's look at what that last element is, which we term as execution effectiveness. So what this is people are doing it, but they feel stuck. They feel that they're just like going nowhere. So they're working really, really hard, but they don't seem to be getting that additional leading indicator being hit at a higher level. So what is it a leader needs to do when people are at this stage? Well, there's really two things that we find they need to do particularly well. One how-to is their diagnosis. They can't simply identify that somebody isn't making enough calls or that they're not doing these activities. They have to find out why those are not being done. The visual that you see on the right hand here is an oversimplification of why people don't do what they said they were going to do. And to quickly go through it, one of the reasons, upper right, is they don't know what they're supposed to do. In other words, they don't know exactly maybe what it looks like or how it has to be done differently than they're currently doing it. So they need help with more clarity on what the activities look like in particular situations. Bottom right, they don't know how. So they're doing it, but they don't know how to do something well. So that taking the skill or the knowledge or the application of the skill or knowledge to the next level is what needs to be tackled. The one on the bottom left, don't want to, that's all about motivation. So I'm unwilling, be it fear, lack of comfort, lack of confidence, to kind of go that extra step and go beyond doing it. Try another way to do something so it actually might be done well. And the one in the upper right, don't have the capability, is no amount of training, motivation, help is actually going to get me to do it. It's just I'm not a fit for that level of what execution needs to look like. So knowing that as a backdrop, what sales leaders have to do in order to get execution effectiveness is once they find the gap, and the gap might be quantity of calls, who they're calling on, or what they're doing, is they really need to be asking and digging into why in order to identify which one of these items is the main reason, the root cause. And as they do that, as you see here, they have to do some deep diving. They have to ask some really deep questions around what is this, and is this really the answer, which is the test for confirmation. Because when you start asking people, the first thing they might say is, I don't have time, or it wasn't appropriate with that particular customer. So you have to dig and really test out whether you found the root cause. Once you've got the root cause, then we have to look at treatments. And for each one of these, I'm going to go through what are the most common things that need to be done once you've identified the root cause. And what we're going to talk about is each of these things the sales leaders control. So the first thing to kind of acknowledge in the treatment is the sales leaders have to own it, because they're the ones who can really get the breakthrough. Breakthrough comes from what sales leaders do to tackle each one of these different areas. So if somebody doesn't know how to do something, the most common things that a sales leader can do is you can help them with a pre-call plan to better prepare them to do what they need to do well. You can model it so they actually know what it looks like. You can role play and make sure they're prepared. You can debrief to help them become more conscious around what they did well or what they need to do differently. If we look at don't know supposed to, you might need to take the time to get more clear on what it looks like. You might need to check deeper for understanding around what it looks like in these different applications that they might seem most challenged to apply it with. And you do have to get the agreement for action. If you don't want to, this one is the most difficult one. But what you need to do here is, if the reason they're not doing it is because of fear, discomfort, don't see what's in it for them, you're going to have to take the time again to connect the dots to their personal motivators. There might be some beliefs that they've got around why they either don't have to do it, or it's not a good idea, or it's an inappropriate time to do the execution expectation. This reconcile beliefs is you have to have a dialogue around why they might be thinking something isn't appropriate. And it's the dialogue around those beliefs and helping them understand maybe there's a different belief around the execution expectations they should have that begins to get some breakthrough in what they're thinking about why they should do something. And the last one, quite frankly, if they just are wrong fit for the job, it's to, as appropriately as possible, once you and they both know that they're not a right fit, to move them out of the job. I could spend time giving you more examples of what all of this looks like relative to the two scenarios that we've been playing with, but I want to make sure that we give you some time here to ask some questions. So let me quickly give you an example of leaders who are doing some things, but it's not quite what I'm talking about and what doing it well looks like. The doing it but not so well is where their diagnosis is they assume the gap. In other words, they don't dialogue. They don't dig in with the person about what's the root cause here. They just assume it. The treatment is training. So they assume the gap is don't know how, and they assume the solution is let's just put people through training, either product training or sales training. The people who get it really do take the time to do the diagnosis. They understand that as they're out there in the field with their people, their primary job is to really be diagnosing what's working and not working so that their feedback is on target, but more importantly, if something's not working, that they're able to get at the root cause and get at the real root cause and then coming up with a solution that's customized, that they are helping with, that they as a sales leader are working side by side with their person to really get put into action. So with that, let's have one more polling question, and then we'll open it up for questions to the group here. Excellent. Wow, this one the group did excellent on, because again, it kind of goes, the first question, restate expectations, is least effective, and then it progresses down. So the last one, work to understand the barrier and customize the solution, 60%. That's excellent. Very, very, very good job. So with that, what we'd like to be able to do is kind of step back and say, okay, so where does all this bring us? What we've tried to cover, and we're opening it up here for questions in a moment, is to really look at what are the 4 things you need to do well in order to get the jump start that you want from business banker sales performance. So hopefully what you've heard is you've heard 4 things. You've heard it's real important to have a clear execution expectation. You've heard what do you have to do to create willingness and readiness, which would motivate. What do you have to do to consistent execution, which is a lot about measurement and giving feedback. And you've heard about how do I get breakthrough, which is a lot about diagnosing and then treating the thing that's hindering their performance. One of the things that we've done, and we're going to be sending you a link, is we have an assessment right now that is going to be open to any of you who are on the line listening to this webinar, which will answer the questions of how are you or your sales leaders within your organization doing on the things that I've just covered. So it's a very simple assessment. It will give you some probability. It will give you some conclusions to say, okay, so am what I'm doing going to give me no breakthrough, minimal breakthrough, significant breakthrough, or big breakthrough? So the diagnostic will give that for you, as well as give you insight into what is working or not working. So there's going to be a link that we'll be sending out to you. So there'll be a follow-up email to this webinar, and you'll have a link to the diagnostic. We'll also be giving you a link to the recording so that you can listen to the recording if you would like to again. And if you liked what we talked about today, how you can connect to our blogs, newsletters, those kinds of things. So thank you very much for listening. At this point, we're going to open it up for questions.
Excellent. We got a couple for you to reply to, Linda. One of which is, how should I go about determining who with to best spend my time? Is it with my new bankers, my low performers, equal time for everybody? Help.
Great question. There is no black and white answer to, so who should you spend your time with? What I can tell you is, as you're looking at trying to get the execution that you need and get the leading measures of progress that you're really looking for, what you have to be careful of, we see this happen a lot, is spending too much time with the bottom third, which is a tendency that we see people doing, is they tend to, if you're using kind of traditional ways of thinking, I'm going to leave my high performers alone. I'm going to spend a lot of time with my middle performers and my new to bank business bankers, or new to the role business bankers. So what we typically encourage people to do is make sure that you are doing the frequency of time with your high performers. They don't need quantity, but they do need quality and they need frequency. They don't need a lot of time, they just need lots of touches. We recommend that you spend minimal time with your bottom third because that's not where you're tending to get the return on your time. And we sometimes call the middle, the movable middle. Make sure that you're spending quantity and quality time with your middle performers, because middle performers are the ones who you will probably get the most amount of performance improvement if they are given the right amount of quantity and quality. Obviously, you need to spend time with the new people, and that would be something that you need to figure out if there's some additional way in which you can get additional help if you are challenged with time. New business bankers, many times there's other people that you can pair them up with, buddy them up with, or get some additional support and assistance. So that's kind of some high-level thoughts around how to spend your time.
Great. Here's another one for you. How long should you work with someone before determining they don't have the capability?
Okay, another great question. That's a difficult one to answer because every organization is a little different. Most of the business banking organizations that we're working with right now are changing. In other words, they're changing what they expect of their business bankers. They're changing what they want the business bankers doing with whom. So it's all about change. So a big question is how long do we give our people to kind of make those transitions? And that does become an organizational answer because every company that we work with, every bank that we work with is a little different. But the simplest answer is the things that we've covered right now have to be done well first. So the normal thing that we see out there is if you are doing all the things that we were talking about and you do it kind of week in and week out for 90 days, you should have a good sense of is somebody going to be able to move forward or not. What then tends to happen is they tend to get very focused on, okay, so let's focus in on a couple of things that have to get turned around for another 90 days. So most common that we see is 6 months. So if the leader is executing the things that we talked about consistently with an individual, 6 months is probably the norm that we see. But again, it's more of an organizational thing. It sometimes goes longer and sometimes is less. Good question.
Excellent. We look like we're running up against the clock, Linda.
Okay.
So we'd like to, on behalf of Business Efficacy, thank everybody for attending today. We will be sending out, hopefully by end of day today, if not early tomorrow morning, a recording and a link to the recording of today's webcast. So if you'd like to reference it, forward it on, that would be fantastic. You'll have the ability to do that, as well as the link to the diagnostic Linda had mentioned.
And obviously, if any of you would like to talk about your particular situation or ask some questions that come to mind after this webinar, you've got my contact information listed there. Be absolutely happy to set up some time to talk. Always willing to give you our perspective and thoughts on a particular question or a situation that you have. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, and we hope everybody has a great rest of their day.